In August of 2019, a 33-year-old Pennsylvania man by the name of David Sumney brutally beat to death his own mother inside her home in South Fayette, Pennsylvania. Following the bloody struggle, Sumney dragged his 76-year-old mother's body into the bathroom and placed her into the bathtub. After this, he proceeded to take a total of 277 selfies of himself and the corpse. Many of the photos would depict Sumney with blood smeared all over his face, and in one photo, he was even shown giving the camera a giant, obnoxious thumbs up. Local police would come across Margaret Sumney's lifeless body during a welfare check conducted in September of 2019. At first, David would deny having any involvement in the crime, but would be arrested once the police got a look at his phone. In addition to the nearly 300 disturbing photos, there was also a video Sumney took of himself washing the corpse off in the bathtub. Sumney would offer no real satisfactory explanation for his actions, although in court he did attempt to apologize for what he had done. Margaret's family refused to believe David or accept his apology. In reality, this didn't just happen out of nowhere. Sumney was thought to be a reportedly entitled individual with a history of anger problems. He had been spoiled by his parents, and some claimed he had even displayed psychopathic tendencies ever since he was only a child. It was surmised that David had killed his mother in a fit of rage after she told him that she no longer had any more money to give him. In court, David's half-sister Ellen stated the following: "You broke her back. You paralyzed our mother. And then you just beat her and beat her. The blood was splattered along the walls." Thanks to a plea bargain, David Sumney would ultimately be sentenced to serve a mere 20 years behind bars. On Mother's Day in 2017, a 37-year-old man named Joshua Lee Webb killed his mother, Tina Marie Webb, age 57, inside her Colton, Oregon home. He then decapitated her and drove out to a grocery store in Estacada, taking the head with him. While still carrying his mother's head, Webb entered the store. He then proceeded to lunge at a store employee with a knife and stab him. That employee was 66-year-old Michael Wagner, whom others described as warm and witty. With other employees helping to wrestle the crazed perpetrator off of his victim, Wagner would be lucky to survive the unprovoked random attack, and Webb would subsequently be arrested and charged on one count of attempted murder and on a second count of murder. Joshua Webb suffered from schizophrenia, although a close friend has remarked that under normal circumstances, Webb was nothing if not a kind and generous person who in fact loved his mother very much. Webb's ex-girlfriend would go on to add that it was only within the last 2 months or so that she'd come to notice that Webb had a crazed look in his eyes that she'd never noticed before. In the end, a judge would acknowledge that, although guilty, Webb's state at the time of the attacks had not allowed him to appreciate or understand the nature of the crimes he was committing. He was thus ruled insane and accordingly sentenced to serve his time at the Oregon State Hospital, where he could also receive care for his unfortunate condition. And then there was a man from Plymouth, Minnesota, named David Vanzo. In January of 2015, Vanzo wheeled his 90-year-old mother, Carol Vanzo, to the bank so that she could make a withdrawal. What's the big deal, you say? Well, according to employees of the Wells Fargo who saw the pair come in, Vanzo's mother was not looking particularly lively. To be more specific, witnesses claimed that Carol's feet appeared to be dangling awkwardly beneath her wheelchair. She remained slumped over the entire time. She didn't speak, she never moved, and nobody could tell whether or not the woman was even breathing. How Vanzo managed to get his mother to endorse the paltry $850 withdrawal is unclear. Following the bizarre event, the mother-son duo would climb back into the taxicab that had taken them there, and Vanzo would request that the driver make a quick stop at the McDonald's before he then returned home, after which he soon called to report his mother dead. When authorities came to the house, it said that they found the pair to have been living in deplorable conditions. The entire home smelled of urine and feces, they said. Carol Vanzo herself was lying in a urine-soaked bed. She was also covered in feces and bed sores, the latter of which a medical examiner determined would have been excruciatingly painful. The medical examiner also determined that Vanzo's mother had likely been dead for 4 to 6 hours prior to their arrival. It remained unclear as to whether Miss Vanzo was already dead by the time she'd been wheeled into the bank. A neighbor who had seen the pair get into the taxi later told reporters they couldn't tell if the woman was dead or simply unconscious. On the other hand, a so-called death blogger named Megan Rosenblum remains skeptical, pointing out that dead weight becomes more and more difficult to move as time goes by. The body grows stiffer and heavier. Once rigor mortis sets in, it's pointed out that the body would have been extremely difficult to move. But either way, when all is said and done, Vanzo would be arrested and charged with neglect of his elderly mother. Around the time of the arrest, Vanzo was quoted as stating that, "I took care of my mom for years," and "I'm the good guy here, not the bad guy." Speaking of neglecting one's elders, it was about a year after his mother had moved in with him and his wife that a 58-year-old man from North China would decide he'd had enough. On May 2nd, 2020, the man's wife, Zhang, would observe her husband, known by his surname Ma, hoist his 79-year-old partially paralyzed mother onto a wheelbarrow and then wheel her off somewhere into the distance. Later on, when Ma returned home, Zhang saw that while he'd brought back the wheelbarrow, his elderly mother was nowhere to be seen. Zhang did not inquire as to the whereabouts of Wang, her husband's mother, but the problem nagged at her as the days went by. Eventually, Zhang's conscience would get the best of her. She ended up dialing the police and telling the local authorities about all she had observed. When questioned about the matter, Ma would confess to the police that he hadn't taken his mother's life. Rather, he had thrown her into a 2-meter grave and covered her with loose earth. In essence, he had buried her alive. Ma agreed to lead investigators to the gravesite, but since 3 days had already passed, there was no hope that they would find the woman alive. It was therefore to everyone's utter astonishment that, as teams would start working to dig up the woman's body, they began to hear soft cries for help coming from underneath the ground. One might say that Wang's survival, to go for 3 days without food or water, being as feeble as she was, and her subsequent recovery, were nothing short of miraculous. Asked as to why he would do such a thing, Ma replied that he had become fed up. He cited feeling psychological pressure for the fact that his mother was unable to care for herself. Namely, Ma blamed her incontinence and her foul smell. Ma would subsequently be charged with attempted murder. Around 4 p.m. on a Friday in December of 2023, 911 dispatchers in Ocean City, New Jersey, received a strange and disturbing call. The man on the other end of the line, 46-year-old Jeffrey Surgent, proceeded to tell the call taker that he was bipolar and that he had just killed his mother. When first responders arrived on scene, they discovered the man naked and lying on top of his mother's body, which they could see had been decapitated. Detectives would later learn that the 74-year-old mother, Alexandria Surgent, had come by to visit Jeffrey that day, and as far as anyone knew, the attack was unprovoked. To many, it even seemed out of character for Jeffrey Surgent. A neighbor who lived in the same apartment building describes once seeing Jeffrey at a barbecue where, according to her, he seemed to be acting normally, mingling and playing with the children in attendance. Those who knew Alexandria Surgent best were, of course, shocked and shaken by the tragic event. The victim's family referred to Miss Surgent as their rock. They described her as devoted and loving, caretaker for her family members. Police reports state that the son apologized profusely for what he had done, and that he was singing a religious song called "Jesus Loves Me" while he was being apprehended. The New Jersey native, who had used a knife to carry out the savage attack, was last reported to be awaiting trial for the murder at a Cape May County facility. Well, friends, as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end, and sadly, it's no different for this video. Just a reminder to please give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and to subscribe to the channel if you fancy this kind of content. If there's one thing I can guarantee, it's that we've got plenty more along the way. Until next time, adios muchacho, and keep yourself safe out there.